Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can. It was doing a whole lot of something before, and then I couldn't hear anything. How are you this morning, Erin?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you, Tara?
Yes, I am. I'm the principal at Benson West Elementary School in
Okay.
Omaha Public Schools.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So I was like, let me get on to make sure everything is working and functioning before I mess something up. So,
That's
uh,
great. That's
yeah.
great. Well,
Yeah.
tell me, I mean, if you have, work to do before this starts, I totally understand, but I always like to know my participants. So just kind of give me a rundown of what's happening there in Omaha.
So right now so upon our return in January, the first 2 weeks the kids were in remote learning.
Okay.
And so this week our kids have returned to the 3-2 family model, which means that A through K come on Monday and Tuesday, L through Z on Thursday and Friday, and then every other Wednesday they switch. So you're either in school 2 days a week or 3 days a week.
Right.
So that started yesterday because we were off on Monday.
Okay.
And then on February the 2nd, our kids will return to 100% in-person learning. So we're just kind of getting geared up for that, getting geared up for just, it's another new start to the school year.
Right. Right.
So we're excited though. All of my teachers are, I think it's the right response, apprehensive just because of the fear of the unknown, but excited because we know it's the best thing in what kids need. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yes, I've been hearing that from teachers all over the country that really anxious to see students because they know it's great for them, but obviously have other, their personal health to consider. So yeah.
Absolutely. Our grades have been pretty dismal, just because our kids who are 100% remote, it's so easy to disconnect. Hey, Megan, that's my instruction facilitator.
Oh, great. Hi,
Yeah.
Megan. Nice to meet you.
Uh,
Oh, sorry, you were saying your grades. Because
So our grades of our students have really suffered. Just lots of failing grades because kids don't get work done who aren't in school, and when they're not here on their days off, they're not getting work done. So it's just been it's been a challenging year, and then we wonder what does that look like long term.
great.
You
Yeah,
know?
I think we all have that question.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we think about a year. Okay, it's a year, but then a year can have a lot of implications, so that you don't see immediately.
I know. It's a lot of uncertainty. And I think for folks who, obviously care deeply about the students, it's evident by the work they do that
Yeah.
it's really hard to
Yeah.
imagine. So,
Yeah. So now where are you located?
so I actually live just outside Washington, D.C. So
Okay.
I taught and was an instructional coach in Washington, D.C. And now I live just outside in Maryland.
Okay.
Yes.
How are things there today?
Things are fine. I'm far enough away from the city, but normally we close for inauguration day. Schools are always closed on inauguration day, and
Okay.
so even this year, DC and Maryland are still remote where I am, and so they even are closed for that because I think
Okay.
it's an unusual day for everybody. Trying to get around the city is pretty much impossible. So
Sure.
um,
Sure.
yeah, but I'm hunkered down, so I don't I can't say exactly how it is, but I think that's probably where everyone is right now.
Yeah. I've been to DC many times, and I've been to Maryland a couple of times, just took the metro over to Maryland.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I know
Excellent.
a little bit of the vicinity of where you are. So love
Oh,
the place.
great.
Beautiful.
Yes. Yes. I'm glad to be here. I moved here after college, so
Oh, nice.
yeah.
Yeah.
What brought you to DC? Were you being a tourist or you had
Um,
clients?
yeah, my stepdad he's retired now, was a postmaster. And so
Okay.
he was part of an organization, and he was part of the leadership in that organization. And so they would go to um, down there to have different meetings and stuff, but we would go to the White House and meet with the congressmen and some of the players in the White House and stuff. So yeah, we got a little bit of
How neat.
a different tour of the White House just because of his position and because of his congressman, which I bet all of those things have gone by the wayside, now just simply by the nature of what's happening because of safety. And so, but it was very neat. But I will tell you, I was so shocked when I went to the White House because on TV it looks so big. It looks so big, but
Right,
it's so
right.
small. I was like, oh my God. But I guess in the day and time when it was built, it wouldn't have been as massive. But anyway.
Right. Well, now in the days of, in the suburbs where we have giant McMansions, right, right.
Yeah.
Yes, and I don't think I've been in since I was a child. Living in DC proper for 10 years, I never went in, but I've heard that there's a lot of sort of underground things, and
I don't know about that.
some of the buildings next door maybe are connected somehow, but
Sure. Well, that's what you always hear, are those interesting things. So yeah, never a dull, never a dull moment. So
that's right. Yes, it's true. It is a city of a lot of action. Well, that's fun. I'm glad to know that you've been here.
I have been. It's a great city. I enjoyed it. Good food, good entertainment. It was a good time.
Great. That's great.
And Megan, have you been to DC before? It sounded like you were shaking your head that you had been there before.
Yeah, I have been there before, and then I went to Maryland. I went and when I was in high school with a girlfriend of mine and visited her uncle and stuff out there. So that was really fun. We went to Virginia and then up to Maryland, and
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was a minute ago because that was also.
Yeah. Well, like everywhere, things are always changing. So
Yeah.
the metro is still here, and
Right.
all the museums are still there, and
Yeah, the metro is beautiful. Like it's very clean,
it's great.
it's a lovely space for public transportation.
I agree. And I taught both high school and middle school, and a lot of my students would take it to get to school. There aren't necessarily buses in DC, and so students take the public transportation. So they're very adept at their young age at getting places. It's really right, and it's nice that it's so easy for them.
My dad grew up in DC for a little bit, and so he definitely was like, yeah, we rode the bus, and it was just
right
what it was,
That's right. Yes. Because oftentimes it's much faster to take the public transportation than trying to drive around. So,
yeah.
looks like we have a new person joining us. Is that Maggie?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, Maggie. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Great, thanks. And Maggie,
Good.
what school are you from?
I'm at Clinton Elementary in Lincoln,
Okay.
part of Lincoln Public Schools.
I'm
And
just
we will
trying to-
have, we'll be having another person from our school join, a fifth grade teacher, but she will be joining closer to 9 o'clock. That will be her plan time.
Okay.
So her name is Carly, and she'll be coming on then.
Okay, I'll look for her around that time then. Okay, great. Now, I did not have a final RSVP list, but they did tell me that we would be a small group and to start on time. So maybe I'll give just 1 or 2 more minutes if that's okay with you guys, but we do have kind of a lot to squeeze in. And I think if folks come on later, then we can catch them up if that works for you all. So let's just say 2 more minutes and we can get started. And how did you all hear about this training?
So we heard about it we're part of CSI, which is Comprehensive Support. I don't remember what this I stands for. And what's the I stand for?
Improvement.
Improvement. And so part of that, which is working through NDE, Nebraska Department of Education, this was one of the things that they had us do as professional development. So that's how we heard about it.
Okay, great. Okay, I am going to follow directions and get started. Like I said, I don't know if anyone else will be joining us, so we can get started. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really glad to be here with you all this morning. We're going to talk today about how, about how to address unfinished learning in an equitable way. So this will be we'll call it our community of practice. We'll meet several times over the next few months, so 4 times we're scheduled to meet. So this will be our community. It's great to meet you all. And so let me just quickly introduce myself. This is working here. I got to chat with you just a minute earlier, but I'm Erin Mccop. I'm a math teacher and leader coach. So I work with teachers, school leaders, instructional coaches, and principals around math instruction. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area, where I was school-based for 10 years. And for the last 3 years, I've not been school-based. I get to work with teachers and leaders from all over the country: Florida, Pennsylvania, Louisiana, Texas, now Nebraska. It's exciting for me to add a state, and just learn about what they're doing and how we can do better for our students. Personally, some of my areas of interest in the classroom are how we use questioning and discussion to really build student understanding, and how we use representations to connect students' understanding to the math that they're learning. So those are just some things that I like to read about and think about when I'm in the classroom. You all had a chance to introduce yourselves, so let's just keep rolling here. The work that we're going to be doing talking about unfinished learning, I want to make sure we reiterate that is connected to the standards, right? So it's really going to be explicitly connected to the Nebraska Teacher and Principal Performance Standards. We know that teachers are that critical link to addressing unfinished learning with students. And so in our 4 sessions, we're going to focus on these 3 areas of teacher standards. So planning and preparation to make sure teachers are ready to address any gaps in student understanding, while staying focused on that grade level content. We want to get students working with grade level material. We'll also focus on instructional strategies that will help them support their students, while acknowledging, readiness for learning is different for different students. And then finally, we'll focus on the assessment category. So we'll talk about strategies to assess student readiness for learning and how to identify critical gaps in that prior grade level learning by using just-in-time assessments. We also know that principals, thank you for being here, are the ones who create those conditions for this great instruction to happen. And so in these sessions, we'll focus on these 3 performance standards for principals. So setting the vision for addressing unfinished learning. We'll think about how we are working with continuous improvement to apply that learning in unique contexts. And then we'll be focusing on how to identify ways to support and develop staff to identify and respond to unfinished learning. You're probably familiar with Zoom after this year, but we just have like a couple requests. And if you all want to add any, I'm happy to add them here. But please be present and open to new ideas. Thank you for having your cameras on. It's nice to see you. Thank you for staying on mute, but if you have something to say, don't be shy to unmute yourself. We probably won't use that breakout room feature just because we're small today, but if we do, go ahead and make sure that you're chatting with folks in that breakout room. And you will have some materials that I'll share with you in just a while. So those will be available for you. Just FYI, those are for you. Nobody's gonna be collecting those or anything. They're your personal materials to just kind of have for reference. I think it goes without saying, because most educators are already in this mindset, but just this is a safe space for learning. So things that we say here, we're going to assume best intent, that people have students' best interest in mind. And so let's assume that about people, and we'll hope that people will assume that about us. How do those sound? Okay, all right. So let's start off by just getting to know each other a little bit and reflect on your experience with addressing unfinished learning. So whatever your role is, go ahead and take a look at these 6 photos, and please type into the chat, but don't hit go yet. Type into the chat which of these best expresses your experience with unfinished learning, and then just a quick sentence as to why. Maybe take 10 more seconds. And then go ahead and hit go whenever you're ready. Thank you. And take a moment to read each other's responses. That's great. Thanks for sharing. And then Janine, I didn't get to say hi to you personally. I just want to say good morning.
Hi, good morning. Sorry, I was a little bit late here. I had a meeting with some staff first.
No problem at all. We're glad you're here.
Hi,
So
yeah, and I'm
coming.
Janine Mann. I am the assistant principal at Wakanda, and our principal, Jenny LeClaire, will be joining us here in just a minute or so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. So let's just take a moment to kind of debrief these. I love that each of you pick, or some of you picked C, but for different reasons. I think this is absolutely true about unfinished learning, that, you know, we're trying to get students up that hill and ready for the new learning of the grade, but you know, you need each other to get there. And then Tara, I definitely feel you on B too. It's just, it sometimes can feel like a large lift, especially for certain students that we really want to help get ready. So thanks for being vulnerable and sharing your experiences so far. That's great. So before we jump into the work here, we want to make sure that we have this common definition of defining unfinished learning. As we know, math learning is unique in that it's conceptually expansive. So, you know, in reading, if a student is reading fluently and can comprehend, you know, those skills, they can use those skills. But math, things are growing. So maybe they're reasoning additively, and they can think about joining and separating and partitioning groups. But then once we start to think about multiplicative reasoning, it's a new skill, right? And then that skill, if you don't have that additive reasoning down, it might be more challenging. So it's a big lift, right? And we're building each step of the way. And also math covers all these different domains like numbers, operations, algebra, geometry, data and statistics, probability. And students need to make connections across those. So it's a lot. You know, an example might be area is a way to measure the flat space occupied by an object. But then it's also helpful for connecting, you know, like an area model with modeling multiplication. So we want to be having students to make those connections. And if students don't have the prior understanding, sometimes it's challenging to make those connections, right? So we're going to define unfinished learning together here as opportunities. So unfinished learning are opportunities to solidify student understanding, of a skill, topic, or idea expected in the foundational standards. So students were expected to have those. As you mentioned, there were some challenges because students have been out of school. We want to help them solidify that understanding so that they can get ready for on grade level material. In our 4 sessions, we're going to be talking about defining that unfinished learning. Mostly that's what we'll be doing today, and defining a process for thinking about it. In sessions 2 through 4, we'll really be digging into how to do this, sort of be digging into that hard work. But our goal in these 4 sessions is to provide you with tools and resources and really a framework to support students who do have unfinished learning, and to build on the work you're already doing. You know, likely you all are doing a lot for your students already. This is just another way to think about this and way to build your skills. Okay. Let me give you a moment to read our 3 objectives today. If you could please give me a thumbs up when you're done. Thanks, Maggie, for using that Zoom feature. Okay, does anyone have any questions about the objectives? Okay, and then let's just say hi to Jim. Hi, Jim, welcome. Nice to meet you.
Sorry, I clicked the wrong button and logged into the wrong meeting, so I'm here now.
We're glad you're here. And Jim, what is your role?
I work with NDE.
Okay, great. All right. Well, we're glad you're here. Okay, so we're through our first 10 minutes getting started and getting ready for our learning today. We're going to take 20 minutes to think about 2 different schools' approaches to addressing unfinished learning. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time reading a case study about 3 key actions for considering this math acceleration approach to addressing unfinished learning. And we'll wrap up by talking about what conditions might need to be in place to be successful, for students to be successful and teachers to be successful with this. And then we'll wrap up for the day. Okay. The first thing you'll want to do is, I'll share this link in the chat. You will want to download your, we call them note catcher for today. And this will have our materials for the session. Again, this is for you. When you click that link, it should prompt you to make a copy. So then you can save it with your name and save it to your drive. It won't be accessible to me or anybody else. But go ahead and do that. And again, if you could give me a thumbs up when you're all set with your notes for the day. Thanks, Maggie. Thanks, Jim. Thank you, Janine. Megan and Tara, are you all set? Sorry if I missed that. Okay. All right. So we're going to start by talking about, like I said, sort of comparing and contrasting 2 schools' approaches to addressing unfinished learning. So you're going to start by reading the first few pages in that note catcher about 2 different schools, Piedmont Valley and Brightwood Academy. And as you're reading, I want you to think about what's similar about how the schools approached unfinished learning and what's different. And then I want you to think about the potential impact each school's approach might have on students' understanding. So we'll give 4 minutes to work on this, and then we'll come back together to discuss. And one more minute. Okay, let's come back together. If you all are finished reading, we're such a small group. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you're done reading the 2 scenarios? Great. Thank you. Okay, so let's take a moment to chat. Let's start first with what was similar. So what was similar between the 2 schools approaches that you noticed? You can put it in the chat and hit enter whenever you're ready. Great. I see data, using data to inform decisions, very important. Enlisted teachers to help with the planning and pacing. Great. Yep. Assessment to make decisions. Great. Yep. Excellent. Working with the leadership teams, teachers, pacing guides, so they're referencing documents. Excellent. Excellent. Great. Great. That's great. Yes. And, I think it's important to note before we start, we're going to a little farther down the road note that one is more the way we want to go than the other, but let's assume again, best intentions, like they were both working to get students in the best place possible. So we noticed that. What was different about their approaches? And do you all think it'd be easier to just do mics for this instead of typing, or do you prefer typing? You're all muted, so I can't hear you. Do you think it would be easier to share aloud, or do you prefer typing?
I think sharing aloud.
Okay, let's do that.
I don't know. That's just my opinion. I'm one person.
Let's do that for the differences. Let's do share aloud since we're a nice small group. So what are some differences you notice between them? And you can just popcorn out, whoever would like to go first.
One of the biggest differences that I noticed was that sounds like Piedmont would spend a lot of time reteaching the skills, and which I think Brightwood also as well, but Brightwood had the approach of we can't let them get further behind and take out so much of the grade level content. So I felt like they were taking probably a deeper look at what they could do to infuse the reteaching into the existing content.
Yes, absolutely. Then that's a big difference between the two, that they're really trying to integrate it into grade level material. You hit on that. Excellent. Any other differences that we want to highlight?
Kind of piggybacking off what she said, that they used data in different ways. I think Piedmont used the MAP scores and then kind of identified a path for students or a track for students, where at Brightwood, they used kind of formative assessments throughout the year based on student work. They made adjustments, seeing what kind of skills kids had or what kind of holes maybe they needed to work to fill.
Excellent, excellent observation. And, you know, I used to work in a school where we used the MAP test. We gave it 3 times a year. And I will admit that when you get that first report and you see some skills that your students are missing, one of the natural reactions is, I got to fill all that. But then I might notice later in the year when we come to a different unit, a student that maybe had a lower MAP score did have a lot of foundational understanding in that other topic. So it's really important to use data that's specific to the topic that students are working on. They're not one size fits all. Great, thank you. Any other differences we want to highlight?
I think another thing is there was a starting point, what works and what doesn't work, so that you kind of have an avenue of where to go and look at the research that indicates, so that you can benefit from someone else's mistakes they've already made. And it gives you a direction so that you don't have to weed through all that. You can kind of get going. I also feel like she really used the various departments, the ESL department, the special ed department, and really looking at all those people to come together to help guide this work as well, because those specialized departments come with different levels of experience and things that kids need that are good for all students. So I feel like there was a lot of inclusiveness as well.
Great, thanks. I think Tara's jumping a little ahead on us, but we'll get there soon. That's okay. Yeah, no, that's how that's how they approached it at Brightwood. So yes, very good. It's gonna be important to include all those people in this decisions. All right, so now let's finish up this, talk of these two schools by thinking about what's the potential impact on students' math experience. So there are some commonalities, but we noted those differences. So what might be the impact?
I think we talked about a little bit, but like students have the potential to fall behind, knowing that at Piedmont they were kind of front loading all of the material that students missed, which then puts them behind in their schedule for pacing for the current school year. Whereas Brightwood was using assessments to decide how to go deeper within the content that they're already teaching in their pacing guide, and making sure that students have time to learn those prerequisite skills that maybe they need at that moment in time.
Great. I love that you say that, at that moment in time. And so we don't want them to get farther and farther behind. Great. All right.
One thing that I noticed about Piedmont when they were adjusting their pacing guides, they talked about addressing supplementary and additional standards. One thing that worries me about that, and this is kind of drawing on my own experience, that things that don't seem essential for specific grade levels, if we choose to cut those out, not seeing the connection of how those skills build on each other for the next grade level. An example I think often is telling people, say, well, telling time is not essential in second grade. However, when you get to third grade, you have to find elapsed time, and you can't find elapsed time if you can't tell time. And so just being really, really mindful that things that you are saying are supplemental, making sure that we're still teaching those skills, because they do build on each other in the other grades.
Yes, thanks for bringing that up, because we're going to talk a little bit later about using documents put out by folks like NDE to guide our decision making in that way, because we don't want to be cutting things arbitrarily that might adversely affect students later, right? Yeah, and skipping entirely doesn't ever feel good, right? And so we need to really be careful and know how all the standards fit together. Yes. So clearly, we're moving here to notice that Brightwood's approach obviously is the one that we're hoping to get towards. So we're in agreement there. And the premise behind their approach is the research that has shown the impact access to grade level assignments has on student learning. So you may be familiar with this opportunity myth report. So they followed nearly 4,000 students across grade levels and venues to learn about their experiences. And so there were 4 key experiences that they noticed were really important for students. Let me give you a minute to go ahead and read those 4. Okay. And students that had access to these 4 experiences consistently perform better, right? So we're going to focus in on what we saw in Brightwood. So having those high expectations, that grade level material, and giving students access to that. In that study, just FYI, this is really what they found, that all students, when given access to grade level assignments, had the equivalent of an additional 1.7 months worth of learning in the same amount of time. And then when that was coupled with high expectations, it was like an extra 4.5 months. This was especially important for students who are behind their peers. We know that unfortunately, in the past, some of our students have been behind. We may have even done it ourselves. I know I probably have done this with students in the past, that the feeling is you want to catch them up, and so then they get further and further behind. But when they were given access to those grade level assignments, they found that it was the equivalent of getting an extra almost 7.5 months of learning, which wouldn't we all love an extra year right now? And then when that was coupled with high expectations, it was almost 8 months of extra learning. So the takeaway here is that we want to be putting these experiences in front of our students, grade level assignments, and meeting them with high expectations. Okay. In 2014, NCTM also put out a statement, regarding this, and really saying that this is an equity issue. So let's go ahead and read their quotation and think about that. And what this is saying is very similar to what you all were mentioning earlier, that if we test students at the very beginning of the year and we group them there and then we just set them on that track forever, we're not going to meet them where they need to be. And so we want to give all students an opportunity to have those grade level work. Now let's just think for a moment. I want to present you with some headlines that have come out over the last year. And I want to just hear how these make you feel. So whenever you're ready, if you read these headlines, just go ahead and drop into the chat. Like, what are these headlines that we're seeing? How do they make you feel? Let's take 30 more seconds. Yep. Tara, I love that you added that second part, determined as an educator. And I think that was really the point of presenting these to you, that it could be easy to get bogged down and sort of anxious about all of this and feeling frustrated. But each of these headlines is really looking at our students through a deficit mindset. But we as educators really want to look at students from an asset mindset, similar to how Brightwood was looking at their students. What do they know? And we as educators can be determined to take what they do know and build on it to meet them where they are. Okay. So putting these here just to say, like, don't be discouraged, and thank you, Tara, for leading the charge on that being determined. So the first school, Piedmont Valley, it seemed like they were, although best intentions, were viewing their students maybe through a more deficit lens. They thought that to learn new information, they had to go backwards and reteach everything. They're trying to, fill in those missing skills based on one beginning of year diagnostic, and they're teaching those skills in isolation and not connecting it to current learning. And Their goals seem to be to catch students up. But as you mentioned, how are we going to catch them up if we're not getting them grade level material? We want to be moving towards more this aligned approach of Brightwood, right? We don't want to see our students through a deficit lens. So really we want to frame all of our thinking around unfinished learning through an asset lens. So our job is to ready students for new learning by connecting their prior knowledge to new information. And we'll call those the just-in-time supports. You might have heard this phrase before. We're talking about accelerating learning by targeting those emerging understandings. So some people call it emerging understanding, some people call it unfinished learning, same thing. Those emerging understandings, we're trying to get them to meet those just in time. We want to make sure, again, we're always connecting to grade level learning. And the goal is to learn on time with the peers, right? We don't want to be separating students out and giving them behind grade level material on grade level. Okay. And this is how the standards were designed. The standards are a progression. As you mentioned a little earlier, I think it was Maggie, that things are connected. And so we need as educators to see that they're connected. And so there are ways to address prior level gaps, some people might call them, within the current grade level, right? You don't have to just go back. Okay. Every group I've worked at uses the word remediation slightly differently. So I just kind of want to define for our time in these next 4 sessions, like how we'll be talking about remediation. We would call that first school Piedmont the remediation approach, and all those things that we mentioned on the left-hand side. What we want to be doing is this acceleration approach. So we're focusing on student assets, opportunities for learning, and being really strategic to prepare them for the current grade level material. And any skills that they're learning from prior grades, we want them to use those immediately. So again, our big idea here is that we want to use accelerate and not remediate. I know that accelerate can sometimes mean to us like pushing students ahead or combining 6th and 7th grade. That's not what we're talking about here. It doesn't mean condensing. It doesn't mean tracking students. All we mean by accelerate is connect that unfinished learning in the context of new learning. So we want to integrate that new information and the native prior knowledge, right? Like you're revving up their engine to get ready for the current grade level material. All right, let me pause for a minute and see if there's any questions or thoughts on that concept.
I think it's good to know that these are the conversations, and I know Megan can hopefully attest to this, that these are the conversations we've been having. So it's nice to know that we're on the right track and that we didn't just come up with some mess that doesn't mean anything. So I think it's kind of affirming. What do you think, Megan?
Yeah, I think so too. We've had a lot of good conversations, I feel like, with teachers and paras and all of our staff really about what kind of this looks like and means for us. So it is a nice affirmation to feel that. So
I'm really glad. That's excellent. And hopefully the next section where we read more about what Brightwood did in their process, hopefully that can give you some ideas on how to work with your staff in that way. Okay, so that's to the next question, like how do we do this? How did Brightwood do this? What was their process? How do we address that unfinished learning in an equitable way? Essentially, they took 3 actions. So they understood the standards, they understood the math and the standards, they understood how the standards were progressing. They diagnosed students on specific skills using quality tasks that gave them information about what students were understanding. And then they made a plan of action. Okay, so developing those instructional strategies to support students in accessing the grade level content. So let's dig into those a little bit more. This is Miss Franklin. So Miss Franklin is an 8th grade teacher, but she's the math PLC lead at Brightwood Academy. And let's suppose she's getting ready to facilitate a PLC meeting with the 5th grade team. The 5th grade team is preparing to teach an upcoming topic on adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. Okay, so on page 4 of your materials, you'll see a section that says, let me just be specific about what exactly it says. It says understand at the top. and it's about, I think it's about 2 pages long, just over 2 pages long. So take 4 minutes to read her process with that first piece, that understand portion. And then we'll come back in 4 minutes to digest the work that she did. Okay, 1 more minute. Okay, go ahead and take yourselves off mute if you'd like to share. Let's again just popcorn out. How did you notice that Ms. Franklin's approach to standard study, so understanding those standards, how did that support teachers with identifying unfinished learning?
Well, they first are looking at that progression of the grade level standards so that they can identify what are some of those essential components that they need to focus in on.
Mm-hmm. So when you say progression, you mean that they're looking not just at their grade level deeply, but they're then looking at the 4th grade standards as well.
Correct.
Great.
Yes.
Yes, great. Mm-hmm. So looking at the standards themselves.
I think there's a lot of power in taking the unit assessment yourself as the teacher and as a team. I think it brings about some really good conversations and can also pick out some of those prerequisite skills that they need from grades prior and different strategies that you're going to need to teach.
Mhm. So part of understanding what's demanded of students is actually knowing what's demanded of students. Great.
I think too, it's helpful to look at what was in the 4th grade curriculum and understand what those skills might have been. And then as they worked together to make a list of those misconceptions or things that students might not have, so they know what teaching they missed so that they can find where it aligns with what they're going to be teaching currently.
And I like that you mentioned the curriculum itself, because often the curriculum has not just what they need to understand, but a lot of the strategies and models that are critical to that future understanding. So by actually referencing the curriculum from a prior grade level, teachers can see what it is exactly students need to be successful at that grade level. Great. And then what about, did you notice how they decided to really look deeply at this standard and work on this one? Did anyone catch that? I know there's a lot on there. So they mentioned that they used, when they were adjusting their pacing guide early, they knew to focus on the standard because they referenced a specific document, the essential instructional content document. So they weren't just, picking standards. They were really clearly and intentionally focused on the standards that they knew based on these documents were most important for students. Great, thank you for highlighting all of those really important areas. Okay. So she had them look at that document, the essential instructional content document. And so it's that, it helps them identify that most important grade level work. The Council of Great City Schools wrote something along those lines. Let me give you a moment to read that. They're essentially saying it's really important for us to look at these documents so we know what to focus on. So let me give you 30 seconds to read that. So we know this is important in normal times, and especially important now that we need to prioritize certain instruction. So how do we prioritize that? How many of you are already familiar with this document, the essential content document? No, okay, let me drop, I can't remember if the link is in the note catcher, but I'll just drop it in the chat now in case you'd like to save it. So this document is excellent for educators looking to know where to focus. So you may be familiar with the Student Achievement Partners focus documents. Those are the ones that look kind of like the ones on the left. And this essential instructional content document specific to Nebraska builds on that, and it has further recommendations for what work to prioritize. And then I think it's great. It connects and explains why certain standards are emphasized and then what they connect to in previous and future grades. So for example, like adding, subtracting fractions is part of the major work of the grade. And so it's in this document and it's talking about like how to reinforce that work. Okay, so definitely a document I recommend checking out, and we'll be able to work with that in the future. Okay, so the really important takeaway here is that we want to be focusing on essential content. So it's deliberately chosen content because we know time is our most valuable commodity. We're trying to get as much learning into our students as we can. I really appreciate that you all brought up the fact that they didn't just look at the 5th grade standards and 5th grade curriculum, that they went back to look across grades, because this is something that's really important to understanding the standards and where our students are going.
I think this is a conversation we've had, is that so many times our teachers look straight at the lesson and
Okay.
don't look at the other pieces that are involved in the curriculum or other documents. And so we really had to guide them through that to help them understand those just-in-time learning and to be able to help get to the meat of what you're doing, but then to also know those prerequisite skills. If a student's struggling, a lot of times that information is already provided for you, and they're like, oh, this makes it so much easier. But it's just like everyone, when someone points it out to you, then you're likely to reuse it. But otherwise, you're like, well, I don't know. I just thought I was supposed to be creating a lesson.
Right. And I think, you've brought up something that we'll talk about towards the end here of putting structures in place to give teachers time to digest that and really understand what's coming before. And so they're not just going lesson to lesson. I mean, we've all been there. We're trying to do 100 things at once as a teacher. And so building time for them to do that is going to be really important. Thank you for mentioning that. Yes. Okay. So now this brings us to the second action. So to diagnose. So we understand the standards, the teachers are deliberately studying the standards, and now we want to diagnose. So we want to uncover student understanding and remember from an asset mindset. Okay, so let's read about what Ms. Franklin and her team did to uncover student understanding. I believe this should be on page 6. It should say diagnose at the top. And we'll give, we're just a couple minutes behind. So if it's okay, we'll give 4 minutes to read this one, and then we'll come back in 4 minutes. Okay, let's come back in 30 seconds. Okay, let's all come back together and you can go ahead and take yourselves off mute. Since we're in a small group, we won't have to do the breakout rooms, which will save us some time. But I'd love to hear from you about what stood out to you about how this team elicited and interpreted that evidence of student understanding.
Well, I think the first thing is they looked at the items, the 3 items, because they created the chart to determine where their students were in the progression of understanding, so that they could determine how to help students. I'm assuming that that's what this is for, so that they can determine where they are. And it's funny, on item 1, they really get it, and then it kind of progresses through the middle and then the end where they have less and less students understanding it. One of the things we used to do is the instructional improvement model, which goes through this and talks about what did I do well to get the students in the got it? What did I not do well? And then comparing it also to my colleagues, so that if I have somebody who's really doing well in certain areas in item 2 that I didn't do well in, I can figure out what they did and what they taught well, or how they taught it in a different way to help me be successful. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's great to have us, sharing our instructional practice. Right. And, we realize that this year is kind of unusual, that the students are taking this formative assessment on 4th grade skills. Maybe they had an opportunity to deeply study it last year, maybe they didn't. But I really appreciate that you noticed that they really got it down on paper. They could visually see that, let's say they just gave the students a grade out of 3. That wouldn't have given as much information as putting their initials here to clearly see exactly what you said. A lot of students are great at decomposing, but explaining why 2 fractions are equivalent might not be a strength of theirs. So having that out there to talk about, I've been being very specific about the skills itself is high up there on the list. Other things that you noticed that stood out to you?
I also think that, well, she knew as that instructional lead that where it was probably going to be the most important for teachers to spend time evaluating when they started with that equivalence.
Mhm.
But also, kind of what we talked about before, going from that asset based model rather than deficit, talking about like what approaches are students trying to use, what strengths do you see, and then what misconceptions do we need to use those strengths to help kind of correct. But so looked really strength based. And then it also helped teachers to understand kind of that continuum of learning that we've been talking about, particularly if you have a new staff or maybe staff that is new to a grade level, they may not understand just how to unpack that standard. And so looking at student work helped to do that.
Mhm. Great, thank you. We're going to talk a little bit more about what you said, their approaches. You're looking at their approaches to understand what they do know from that asset-based model. Great. Any other thoughts?
One thing that I
Yes.
just wanted to note is that I think if these conversations are happening within a team, that the team feels safe, because I think sometimes it's hard for teachers to look at their data if it's not very good, and to say,
Mm,
hey, I need help with this. So I think that the facilitator, just from what I'm reading, has set it up in a way where it is data driven and it's not about the teacher, so much, and has created a space where people feel comfortable to have these conversations, which is equally as important.
Thanks for bringing that up. We're going to talk about that more at the end, about how do we create that environment. But I think that's really important to note that this doesn't just happen overnight. People have to feel like it's a safe space and they're not going to be judged based on this. Yep, great. Let's review some of the things that you mentioned, some things we want to really stamp here. So I heard you all say, they weren't testing every prior skill. They were really specifically testing the 3 skills from 4th grade that they thought students might need, and they wanted to understand their approaches before they got to 5th grade, right? They weren't testing fact fluency, even though of course that's helpful for equivalent fractions. It doesn't preclude students from being successful in working with adding and subtracting fractions, right? Same with multi-digit division. Maybe a student struggled with that, but that's not going to hold them back here. We want to focus on what are the things that they need to understand to be able to be successful in this grade level task, right? So they focused on those. You know, this first visual on the left, they were really eliciting that evidence of students' understandings for those most relevant skills. So what are the building blocks? In the middle, you mentioned the strategies. What approaches are they taking? They didn't just give them a multiple choice, right? They asked them to do questions that emphasize the strategies that we know are important for building that understanding. And many times these strategies and models are mentioned in the standards. And so if you go back to that prior curriculum of 4th grade, you'll be able to find those specific questions that are testing that exact strategy and model that we want students to have. And of course, they, you know, required students to explain their thinking. So it wasn't focused on right and wrong. It was focused on how were they thinking, that asset-based model. So you all hit those on the head. Very good. And then in terms of timing, they gave it right before the unit. You know, I think this was obvious to us because we talked about it earlier, but, you know, they weren't giving these tasks at the beginning. Also, it was a manageable amount of data. Giving 3 questions feels manageable, right? To give and to grade. And especially if you're looking at student understanding, you want something that's manageable. And then they use that data to bring students into grade level instruction. So that was the point of this, was that where are they and how do we get them on grade level? That is our laser focus here. All right, so now they've done that, they understood the standards, they were looking at students' assets and their approaches. Now we need a plan of action, right? Because we all care so much about our students, and as Tara said earlier, we're motivated to do this, right? We want to get them there. And so there's one more section in your reading where you'll get to see what they did next. So that is on. That for me, that is on page 9. Okay, so go ahead and check out page, I think it's 9 through 11. 9 through 11, and read about how this team made a plan after they had information about their students. And again, let's take 4 minutes to read that. Okay, whenever you're ready, let's come back and let's change it up here. I know we were doing a great job of sharing aloud, but why don't we this time each take a minute to just chat something that stood out to you about how the teachers use that formative assessment evidence, what students do understand, to create and implement an instructional plan. So something that stood out to you about this. You can just hit enter in the chat whenever you're ready. So I see two people saying this idea of changing up the do now, like adding the do now based on what your students need. Yep. Planning for small group instruction. Yes, we're not just giving students in small groups worksheets. We're giving them very targeted tasks that are specific to building that understanding. Yes. Because again, we saw at the very beginning, putting high quality materials in front of students is an equity issue. And so if our students need that small group work, we want to be giving them those high quality resources. Anyone else like to add anything? Okay, so I'll just summarize for us. So we saw in that section that, they built on student strengths and student understanding, right? So they took where students were and they were connecting what students did understand about fractional parts. They were building on what they knew and connecting it to the new relevant information. They added that do now to solidify their understanding about equivalence. And they added it at the point in the learning sequence where it made sense. So when we still accelerate, like we're thinking about revving that engine, right? Like you want to rev the engine right before you go. So you're giving them that opportunity right before they're about to take off into that material. It was all based on student work, right? What did students understand? And then again, they're utilizing resources from previous grade levels. So if they wanted to add that do now, or they wanted to add, you probably saw that they added some lessons during their flex days. They were looking back to that previous grade level material because time is teachers' most precious resource. They don't have time to be making high quality materials. They're out there, use them, right? So look back to fourth grade if you want to add that lesson. And I'm glad Tara also mentioned with the small groups. So they also need high quality materials and problem-based tasks in those small groups. And conversations will come of those tasks versus just kind of like a worksheet. Okay, so now it's time to consider where we are and how you all are feeling about your schools and your students, okay? So take some personal time to reflect now. To what extent would you say these three practices are happening, and how do you know? And then what feels urgent to you right now? So take some personal time to reflect on those questions. And I know we're a brand new community of practice, but if you're willing to share something that feels urgent to you right now, feel free to add it to the chat.
We just were going to talk here. Hi.
Great. Hi.
Yeah, we were just kind of talking about kind of like disjointment sometimes when you're trying to do so much of it as like our leadership team. And we had kind of shared about, working with our teachers and kind of coming up with some of that, doing some of that work, that diagnose work, and then that planning and action. But as the leadership in our building, we're still there facilitating those conversations, but having them actually do the work. Whereas right now, like our leadership team, we try to do a lot of that work for our teachers, and it's just kind of hard because they're trying to do everything. And then that also, we talked about building like confidence in our teachers too, and then building leadership in our building where teachers can look to other teachers for help or expertise as well.
Great. Yeah, I think what you said is loaded with lots of different points that many times, like when we were teaching, we probably wanted to do a lot of things for our students, but does that help them learn, right? And so, I like that you brought up you as leaders. Your role is to kind of guide the teachers or maybe support teacher leaders to guide other teachers. Because we notice that it's really important for teachers to understand this too, as they're the ones in the classroom teaching students. So thank you for sharing that. And then there's something in the chat. Just give me a moment to read that. Thanks, Maggie. That's a good point. Maggie mentioned that sometimes we use those sort of flex days or target instruction days to reteach. But wouldn't it be nice if we could, ahead of time, consider what skills students might need to support them in grade level work so we don't have to reteach, right? If we're thinking ahead, how we build them up instead of teaching them this grade level thing and then going backwards or try to reteach it the same way. So that's a good point. Yes, great.
So I think Megan and I were kind of collaborating. We're in different spaces of the building, but
Okay.
we were on the radio talking.
I saw you all. That was great.
Yeah, we were actually working. We were working. But we thought about where we are, and if we look at the understand, diagnose, and kind of plan and take action pieces of it, we feel like we're on that spectrum of all pieces, but we've got several new teachers. And so that's the piece of driving deeper with the curriculum to ensure that they understand and then monitoring those pieces. But I feel like we are diagnosing and using the formative and summative assessments we have along with the map data to really look at and create action plans for our students. So teachers know kind of where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, so that they can help bridge those gaps between things, along with understanding of the students. Okay, if I know Tara is really struggling with X, Y, and Z during the instructional piece, I'm going to concentrate on her a little bit more so that I know where students lie within the spectrum of understanding so that we can help them develop their skills better and become stronger math students or students in depending on what curriculum it is. Megan, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just thinking about having teachers feeling like that autonomy a little bit too, of like being okay with saying, oh my gosh, I need to just stop for a second and do a little bit of adjusting. And we've talked about that in our building quite a bit too as a group. And it's okay to stop for a second and make sure that students understand that concept and not just continue on. We want to expose them to grade level concepts and standards, but we have to kind of build them and fold that in. And it's okay to have those stop and teach moments, and it's okay to have that autonomy as a teacher.
And I think what I heard you say, I'd like to summarize. So Tara was mentioning some of the newer teachers may need some more time themselves to understand that progression of skills so that, like you were saying, Megan, they know when to pause, they know when to build up. Okay, yes, that's a very real thing. And I mean, it takes so long to really truly understand these progressions, and so honoring that it does take some study and some skill, and you might learn new things each time you look at student work or tasks. So thanks for bringing that up. Okay, so we're going to finish up today by talking about the conditions for success. So what needs to be in place for these 3 actions to happen in our schools? Okay, so we looked at that work, we talked about what the teachers did, and then we need to think about what the principal did to make this possible, and the leadership team to allow the teams to have this time to work together. So let's reflect on what were those things you noticed. So like what systems or structures were in place to support Ms. Franklin and the team in this work. And as you think of a condition, go ahead and drop it in the chat. See PLC and collaboration meeting time. Yep, that PLC time is very important. Anyone else?
I'm going to say it out loud because typing is not a great thing.
Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Well, just because I can't, too many words. They obviously have some structures in place that they allow them to, they know how to go back in and dig down on those standards and do that analysis. That's already set up for them. It's not something that they just are learning how to do as they go through this. They have that set up. Those teachers knew to go back and find the holes, I guess, for lack of better ways, and how to do it, and how to document what each kid's path was, whether it was right, wrong, or otherwise. They had that structure in place.
They had that skill to be looking at what they did and then being able to put it in that chart.
Yeah.
Great. And they had Miss Franklin to support them.
Yes.
She had released time to be thinking deeply about this. Thank you. Okay, so what we notice is that, let me just wait a second to read Janine's. Thanks, Janine. Yes. Great, so there's the teacher leader, having those documents to refer to, pacing guides, and then understanding what assessment items to use. Yep, high quality items from the curriculum. Very good. Okay, so you all mentioned these in some form or another. So there was strategic use of time, there was strategically leveraging the resources and the people, and then strategic grouping, right? So time, when we talk about time, at Brightwood, they created a schedule that had math blocks that were 75 to 90 minutes long, at least, right? Students need time to work on math. There was an additional intervention block that was in the schedule. You probably saw that mentioned, that students were then working in small groups during that intervention time. Each module has 2 to 3 flex days, so that's built into the pacing guide. And teachers have sufficient protected daily planning time and supported weekly PLC time. Obviously sufficient is a relative term, but at least 60 minutes of protected time. So we mean that this is time that they can use to evaluate those assessments and categorize students, that they can do some of that standard study. So they need time to do that. And then when we say supported weekly PLC time, that's really that important piece, that Ms. Franklin was there guiding them through that process and had done some of the pre-work to think about what the teachers might need to do to find out and uncover what their students understood. So some leadership, in that PLC environment. They also leveraged the resources. So, right, they looked at their high quality curriculum for items. They weren't going elsewhere. They looked at that resource. They leveraged the content leader. So Ms. Franklin was able to use her skills, and she was given that release time to support them. And then teachers are working together, right? They're supporting each other through those planning meetings or strategic relationships. I think Tara mentioned this towards the beginning, that teachers that have different titles didn't always stick with like exactly what was in their title. They rearranged students based on what was best for students. And they made a plan that way so that all students could be successful. And then finally, they use strategic grouping. I don't know, we talked about this much, but the idea is that they're able to flexibly move students. So after each assessment, they're not stuck in one of their intervention groups, right? Because students have different prerequisite skills. And so we want to group them specifically based on what they need, okay? And they had that structure where they could flexibly move students. They weren't kind of stuck in their schedule. So it's another reflection time now. There is a space for you to, you can either jot it in your notebook or you can jot it in your note catcher. What's currently happening, this is for you to personally reflect, what's currently happening effectively at your school with these structures in place to support this? What's happening effectively? And then what's something that you'd like to improve or that could be improved? Let's take 3 minutes to personally reflect. Okay, let's come back together. I know as educators, a lot of times we jump to the what could be improved because we always want to be improving our practice, but could we just popcorn out what's something that's happening effectively right now? I know some people have shared some positive things from their school, but I think it would be great to share out one thing that's happening effectively.
For us at Clinton, we have 2 math coaches. And so I would say the strategic grouping has been probably what's been most effective because the coaches have been able to support teams in analyzing assessment data and identifying students and what they need as far as reteaching and have formed intervention groups. I didn't know if you wanted just effective or improvement.
Yeah, let's just do effective first. That's
Okay.
great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm really glad that you're able to do those strategic groupings. Great. Other folks, things that are effective? And then we can jump to the improved, but we should celebrate the hard work that's happening.
I think some of the things we're seeing are, and it may be a small thing, but positive attitudes. And I say that in the sense that this year has been a little different than any other year, and our teachers still show up every day, have a positive attitude. We're seeing great instruction in the classroom. Our coaching and feedback form that we created, teachers are really embracing it. We're seeing great instructional strategies in the classroom. We're seeing engagement increasing, and we're seeing teachers who like what they're doing.
That's great. Thank you, Tara.
We said that we have a set PLC time. So every Wednesday we meet with teachers for PLC. So we have a good chunk of time set aside in our schedules. And then
Great.
also teachers are like taking assessments ahead of time to think about what misconceptions they may need to plan for. And then we also during that PLC time evaluate the data that we've seen on those assessments as we think about how we unpack the standards and help maybe remediate or accelerate some things that kids didn't get or that we missed in our instruction, and what do we need to do next.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sneaking accelerate in there.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and that's great that you have that time built in and that you're using those resources that you have to work on this. Excellent. Excellent. Well, I'll let you all keep the what specifically could be improved. Let's keep that to yourselves. And then the next time we meet, hopefully we'll hear that something has been tweaked a little bit. Because unfortunately it's time to wrap up. Our time is coming to a close. Okay. So there's one thing I would like to ask you to do before our next session. There's a self-assessment that's purely for you. Sorry, I had the link here. It's purely for you. And this is a self-assessment to help you assess the climate and what's happening so far at your school. It's for you. You're not evaluated on this, but it's just something to help us consider our own practice. So if you could do this before the next time we meet, that would be great. And we'll talk about it the next time. Questions about that? Okay. So the next time we meet will be February 24th. I'm looking forward to it already. And we're really going to dig into that first part of what the teachers and Ms. Franklin did. So how do we go about crafting quality formative assessments and diagnosing that unfinished learning in math. So we'll peel back the cover a little bit on how they did that, how they picked the 3 items, and what information that can give us about student learning. Okay. And we'll just ask you before you go to give us some feedback on how the session was so that we can improve. We're always looking to improve as well. And again, the self-assessment is for next time, like you can do it before we meet again, but this survey, I would really appreciate it if you could do it today if you have time. And, I'll be here, so if you want to privately chat me any questions or if you want to ask them out loud, I can stick around for a few minutes. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
I hope you have a great rest of the day and everybody stay safe, obviously, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Erin.
Thanks, Megan. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Thanks, Erin.
Thanks. Thanks, Jim.
I'm not doing the feedback, but I like what you're doing. I like the concept behind the acceleration and not going back, but filling in gaps as you go along. I think that's really good.
Great. Yes, definitely. And I think research supports us, so that's good news.
Yeah. Well, because I've been thinking if I was still leading a school district, how we would attack the situation, and I think that's an important way to do it.
Mhm. Right,
Yes.
rather than going backwards.
Yes.
Hi, Janine. Nice to meet you. See you next time.
Hi, thank you. This is Mrs. LeClaire, our principal, who I said
Thanks, Mrs. LeClaire. I'm sorry I didn't ask your name.
Oh my gosh, you're so fine. Thank you for today. This was great. And it gave us lots of things that reaffirm what we're doing, and then lots of things to think about for making it even better. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Great. I'm so glad. Yes, and keep up the good work. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Great. Great. Now, Jim, will you be in the next session with me?
I think so. Yeah, I have 3 schools that are in this group, and they're all in separate sessions, so I'm able to stick with all of them. So yeah, I will be
Okay.
again.
Well,
So that'll
sounds
be
great.
good.
All right.
right.
Well, I'll see you in about 15 minutes then.
All right. Oh no, Erin, I'm sorry. I won't be. I'll be here in February, not
I see.
later today.
You'll be here in February. Just
Yeah,
kidding.
I'll be here in
Okay.
February. Yep. Got it.
Okay. All right. Stay safe, Jim. See you.
You bet. Bye.
Bye-bye.